Lagos, Nigeria, was a city that never slept. Its streets were an eternal rush of people, traffic, and noise, a reflection of the ambitions that pulsed through its heart. Yet inside the towering walls of multipower industries, all was stillness and precision. Adebayo Olamide, the CEO, ran the company with an iron fist, his presence one that commanded immediate respect from everyone in the organization. But the truth was, Adebayo had begun to feel disconnected from his company, from the very people who made it run. 4 years, he had been the visionary, the man who had steered multipower industries to unimaginable success. But the higher he climbed, the further he distanced himself from the ground-level operations. The employees, the managers, even his closest associates had become faceless to him. He was no longer the man in the trenches but an entity, a symbol. That's when he decided, he needed to test his candidates for the general manager position, a role that would shape the future of the company. He could no longer trust that the polished resumes and rehearsed answers from the interviewees would reveal their true character. He would need to see their actions, their instincts, when they didn't know they were being watched. But Adebayo wasn't about to simply sit in his office and observe through a window. No, he needed to get closer to the action, to be one of them, to walk in their shoes, even for just a few hours. And so, he made a daring decision. He would disguise himself as one of the candidates, only, he wouldn't dress the part of a high-flying CEO. He would wear something far more ordinary. Something that would make him blend in, something beneath their notice. Adebayo pulled out an old, worn-out suit from his closet, a suit that hadn't seen the light of day in years. It was cheap, ill-fitting, and devoid of the kind of sharpness that usually accompanied his public persona. He threw on a tie that was slightly too large for his neck and a pair of shoes that looked worn down from years of use. His reflection in the mirror barely resembled the polished, powerful CEO he was known to be. "Today, I will be nobody," he muttered to himself as he adjusted the tie, his fingers brushing against the fabric. "Today, I will be just one of them." He stepped into the sleek, modern lobby of Multipower Industries, the security guard at the entrance giving him a passing glance, not recognizing him. The receptionist, a young woman with a friendly smile, looked up at him as he approached. "Good morning," she said. "Are you here for the interview?" Adebayo nodded, trying his best to hide his sharp instincts behind a mask of humility. "Yes, I am," he said, his voice lower than usual, careful not to reveal his true identity. "I'm here for the general manager position." The receptionist gave him a polite smile. "Please take a seat. The other candidates are waiting in the lobby. They'll be called in shortly." Adebayo took a seat in the corner of the room, observing the candidates who had already gathered. They looked the part, polished, well-dressed, their postures confident, their eyes filled with ambition. But something about the whole scene struck Adebayo as rehearsed, false even. The candidates smiled too widely, their conversations too carefully curated. They were in competition with one another, but not in a way that made them seem like true leaders. Instead, they looked like actors playing the part of an ideal candidate. The first to arrive was Kenneth. He walked in with an air of superiority, a wide, confident grin plastered on his face. His suit was sleek, expensive, a shade of gray that made him look like the very definition of corporate success. He gave a quick nod to the receptionist before sitting down, his posture perfect. Adebayo studied him carefully, noting how Kenneth scanned the room for other potential rivals, his eyes assessing the other candidates with a mixture of disdain and arrogance. Then came Kechi. She was mid-40s. Elegant, and powerful in a way that was almost intimidating. Her dress was immaculate, her makeup flawless. She strode in with a quiet confidence that demanded attention. Adebayo watched as she surveyed the room, her gaze sharp as she sized up the other candidates. She didn't speak immediately, instead choosing to sit with poise, her attention focused on her phone. But even from the way she held herself, Adebayo could tell that she was used to being in charge. Lastly, Tunde arrived. He was in his early 30s, and as he entered, Adebayo immediately sensed a nervousness about him. He was slightly disheveled, his shirt untucked at the back, his tie a little too loose. His shoes were scuffed, and his suit was plain, definitely not of the same quality as Kenneth's on Kechi's. Tunde's eyes darted nervously around the room, as though unsure of his place among the other, more polished candidates. He took a seat in the far corner, his posture slumped, his hands fidgeting in his lap. Adebayo watched him closely. There was something about Tunde that felt different. The other two candidates were so focused on presenting a version of themselves, but Tunde seemed almost vulnerable. He didn't fit the mold of the ambitious corporate warrior that Adebayo had expected. And in that moment, Adebayo felt a strange sense of empathy for him. The candidates chatted among themselves, exchanging pleasantries, but Adebayo noticed how each of them tried to assert themselves in subtle ways. Kenneth was the loudest, his voice booming as he boasted about his previous accomplishments. Nkechi, though quieter, exuded a powerful presence that made the room fall silent whenever she spoke. But it was Tunde who caught Adebayo's attention. Tunde's voice was soft but genuine. When he spoke, it wasn't to impress, but rather to connect. He asked questions about the company, about the industry, and his responses were thoughtful, even though they were far less polished than the others. Adebayo couldn't help but feel intrigued. There was something authentic about Tunde, something raw, even if it was hidden beneath layers of self-doubt. The time for the interviews came, and each candidate was called into the conference room, one by one. Adebayo followed them silently, observing how they interacted with the receptionists, how they carried themselves in the halls. It was clear to him who had rehearsed their answers, who had perfected their image. But none of them had truly impressed him. Not yet. Finally, it was Adebayo's turn. He stood up, feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement as he approached the receptionist. "My name is Chidi," he said, using the name he had chosen for his disguise. The receptionist glanced at him with a polite smile. "Please follow me, Chidi." Adebayo entered the room, and he was greeted by a panel of interviewers. They barely gave him a second glance as they gestured for him to sit. His attire was different, old-fashioned, ill-fitting. Adebayo noticed the subtle flicker of surprise in their eyes, but they quickly masked it. He sat down, his hands clasped in his lap, his eyes cast downward. He wasn't Adebayo Olamide, the CEO of Multipower Industries. He was just a man, hoping for a chance. The interview began. "So, Chidi," the head of the panel said, "tell us why you think you're a good fit for this position." Adebayo looked up slowly, his eyes meeting theirs. "I believe in hard work. I believe in respecting everyone, from the janitor to the CEO. I've spent years watching people, understanding how they think, how they behave. A good leader doesn't only know how to manage, they know how to listen, to understand, to connect." The panel exchanged glances, and Adebayo could tell they were unsure what to make of his response. They expected arrogance, confidence, the usual scripted responses. But instead, they were met with humility. "I've worked in many different roles." Adebayo continued. "I've been in the trenches, doing the work that nobody wants to do. I've learned that a good leader doesn't need to stand out in a crowd. They need to blend in when necessary, to observe, to understand people before they make decisions." The room fell silent. Adebayo could see the interviewers exchange puzzled looks. His answers weren't polished. They weren't what they were expecting. And yet, there was something compelling about them. As the interview continued, Adebayo could sense the tension in the room building. The panel was growing increasingly uncomfortable with his unconventional responses. But as they fired more questions at him, Adebayo answered each one calmly, each response more thoughtful than the last. He wasn't here to impress them with polished answers or big words. He was here to show them something real, something they couldn't find in any resume. After what felt like an eternity, the interview ended. Adebayo stood up, his hands still slightly trembling. The panel didn't seem to know what to make of him. He was different. He was unexpected. Later that afternoon, Adebayo gathered the candidates together. His disguise had worked. They were all in for the surprise of their lives. He removed his cheap tie and pulled off his mismatched shoes. As he stood before them, his true identity was revealed. "I've been watching you all," he said, his voice firm. "And now you know who I am." The candidates stared at him, disbelief flooding their faces. Kenneth was the first to speak, his voice dripping with contempt. "This is ridiculous," he exclaimed. You were Chidi." Adebayo nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Yes. I wanted to see you as you really are. And I've learned everything I need to know." Adebayo turned to Tunde, who was still in shock. "Tunde, you were the only one who stood out to me. You didn't try to impress me. You didn't try to be someone you're not. You showed humility, and that's what true leadership is." Tunde's mouth hung open in disbelief. "But I don't have the experience." Adebayo smiled warmly. "Experience can be taught. Humility cannot." The revelation of Adebayo's identity left a thick silence in the room, almost suffocating. Tunde still stood there, stunned, trying to process the shock. The other candidates, Kenneth and Nkechi, were equally speechless, their faces betraying their disbelief. Kenneth, however, seemed to be the first to break the silence, though it wasn't with admiration. "This is absurd," he muttered under his breath, but loud enough for everyone to hear. His face contorted with indignation as he took a step toward Adebayo, as if challenging him. You were just playing games with us? I came here because I'm qualified. I've worked hard to get where I am. I don't have time for these childish stunts." Adebayo didn't flinch. He remained calm, steady, looking at Kenneth with the practiced patience of someone who had seen far more than what this moment offered. His eyes locked with Kenneth's, and in that brief exchange, there was no hostility, only the quiet recognition that Kenneth had shown his true colors. "You see, Kenneth," Adebayo said, his voice firm but measured, "it's not about qualifications or resume lines. You think that power comes from titles and achievements. But real power, real leadership, is about something far deeper. And you, Kenneth, are too focused on your own reflection to see it." Kenneth's face reddened. He opened his mouth to retort, but Adebayo raised a hand to stop him, his gaze unwavering. "You had the confidence, but no authenticity. You've played the part so long that you forgot to be real." Adebayo's words hung in the air like a challenge, and Kenneth's lips pressed tightly together, his pride wounded. Turning to Nkechi, Adebayo saw a very different kind of response. She was calm, calculating, but the expression on her face was unreadable. Her sharp eyes fixed on Adebayo, as if trying to decide if she could trust the situation. She leaned back slightly in her seat, her lips curling into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You've made your point," Nkechi said softly, her voice smooth. "But don't you think it's a little beneath you? Playing these games, testing us like children? If you're really the CEO, you don't need to stoop to such tricks." Adebayo chuckled, a deep, rich sound that filled the room. "You think I'm stooping, Nkechi? What does it say about the people who want to lead this company if they can't see past their own ambition? If they only wear masks and never show who they truly are?" Nkechi's expression faltered for a moment, before she quickly regained her composure. "You underestimate me, Mr. Olamide. I've seen what it takes to lead. And I've done it without games." Adebayo looked at her, sensing the defensive armor she wore, the way she carefully constructed her identity. "You've built your walls very high, Nkechi. But a good leader doesn't need walls. They need to create bridges, to inspire trust, not fear." She stood up abruptly, her eyes narrowing. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice low but firm. "No one plays me for a fool." Adebayo's gaze softened, though there was no sign of fear in his eyes. He nodded slightly. "Perhaps, Nkechi. But a fool is someone who doesn't understand the difference between control and leadership. You control people, but do you lead them?" Nkechi turned on her heel and strode out of the room, her steps echoing down the hallway, but Adebayo didn't let his attention waver. Kenneth, too, turned and followed, his ego bruised but his resolve unwavering. He, too, wasn't interested in accepting the lesson that had been laid bare in front of him. They left the room in silence, their pride having been hurt beyond repair. It was just Adebayo and Tunde now. Tunde stood there, still holding himself awkwardly, his body language betraying his uncertainty. He had been the one who had been most open, the most vulnerable, but now he seemed unsure if he had been accepted, or if he was even truly ready for this role. Adebayo walked toward him, his expression softening. "Tunde," he began. Gently, his voice low, "You're the only one who hasn't run. The others, they're focused on what they can gain from this. But you showed something real today. Humility. The kind of humility that makes people follow." Tunde swallowed hard, his eyes glistening with a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "But I don't have the experience. I've never been in a leadership role like this. How can I lead such a big company?" Adebayo smiled, the warmth of his gaze comforting. "Leadership isn't about experience, Tunde. It's about potential. And you have the heart of a leader. That's something the others never had. They were too busy pretending. But you were true." Tunde shifted his weight, feeling the weight of the words but unsure how to carry them. "I'm not sure I can be the kind of leader you want. I've made mistakes. I've failed. I'm just not perfect like they are." Adebayo stepped forward, placing a hand on Tunde's shoulder, looking him straight in the eyes. "Perfection doesn't exist, Tunde. But integrity, kindness, the ability to grow, those are the things that matter. It's not about being perfect. It's about being real. And I think you'll be able to do more for this company than any of the others, because you understand that." Tunde looked down at the floor, his mind racing with self-doubt. But Adebayo could see the change beginning to take place. The walls that Tunde had built around himself were slowly crumbling, and beneath the uncertainty, there was something worth nurturing. After a long moment, Tunde finally looked up, a quiet resolve replacing the doubt in his eyes. "You really think I can do it?" Adebayo nodded, his smile steady and full of confidence. "I don't think, Tunde. I know. You've already shown me more than I ever expected. You just need to trust yourself." As the two men stood there, the door opened softly behind them. The receptionist entered, her eyes wide with the realization of what had just transpired. "Mr. Alamide, the other candidates are gone?" she asked, her voice tentative. Adebayo glanced at her and smiled. "Yes. I've seen enough." He turned back to Tunde. "Welcome to Multipower Industries, General Manager." Tunde's breath caught in his throat. The weight of the moment hit him full force, but it wasn't fear he felt, it was excitement. And for the first time in his life, he knew he had a chance to become something he never thought he could be. "Thank you," Tunde whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for believing in me." Adebayo gave him a reassuring nod, his eyes filled with something deep and unspoken, an understanding that only those who had been in the trenches, who had truly seen people for who they were, could share. "You'll make a great leader, Tunde," he said. "Now, let's build something great." The door shut behind them, and as the two walked down the hall, the weight of the decision that had just been made settled in. The future of Multipower Industries was now in Tunde's hands, and Adebayo knew he had chosen the right person. Tunde's journey was only just beginning. But now, he was no longer just another face in the crowd. He was a leader.